Welcome everyone today to the webinar entitled Agile ROI, the Business Case for Agility. Today we're taking a little different perspective. So often a compelling business case, and the trick is articulating the value of Agile in financial terms. You know, the way a financially minded business executive thinks about these things. So today, that's exactly what we're going to do. Today, I'm joined by John Rudd, President and CFO of Solutions IQ, who is going to give us a financial look at the value of Agile. As Leanne indicated, at the conclusion of the live presentation, participants are going to receive an email with links to the recording and copies of the slides. We will reserve time at the end to answer your questions, so please submit your questions online throughout the presentation using the GoToWebinar function on your screen. Now a little bit more about our speaker. John Rudd is President and CFO of Solutions IQ. Prior to joining Solutions IQ, he was a partner at a financial consulting and investment banking firm where he led the firm's financial practice specializing in advisory services, mergers and acquisitions, and interim management. As a consultant with more than 20 years of experience, John has filled multiple interim executive roles including CEO, President, CFO, and Chief Restructuring Officer. He's worked as CFO of a West Coast oil company and was a commodity lender for ING. John received his BS in economics from the University of Minnesota and his MBA from the University of Southern California. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, John.
Thanks, Eric, and thanks for everybody who's joined in today. As Eric kind of walked through my background, I've had a number of different financial roles, and I can say that in those roles, I've had different interfaces with IT projects and IT spend, and most of those with kind of unhappy results. As a matter of fact, a lot of frustration that I had dating back to my early years in banking, where some of my clients would point to their underperformance based on failed IT projects. When I was doing investment banking, I had transactions that didn't close as a result of the fact that integration didn't take place or there were expectations that weren't realized. And I spent a chunk of my career really focused on restructurings and turnarounds, and the core of a number of those restructurings and problems resulting from those companies, the core was associated with failed IT projects. So the only thing I can really positively say about kind of my broad experience in IT projects is that it, at one point in my career, produced a fair amount of work for me when I was doing restructuring. So when I actually joined Solutions IQ about 2.5 years ago, I came with a fair degree of skepticism, and we were an Agile shop. We did Agile consulting, and we have outsourced development. We do Agile internally. So just talking to developers and learning a little bit about what we do at Solutions IQ, the term Agile came up a fair amount, and the more and more I heard about it, the more and more I just viewed it as another buzzword in the industry. And frankly, my skepticism kind of dismissed what people were saying as value, and I was focused on the fact that this is a feel-good developer process that really allows them to avoid commitment. So, I not only had a little skepticism, but I formed an early opinion, which wasn't that positive. It wasn't until viewing from our Agile clients as well as internally a lot of the positive results that we continued to see that I really took a harder look and said, okay, what's the difference here? What is it about, aside from the fact that it makes our, developers have smiles on their faces, what is it about this that, is different? And as looking at our actually own experience in this evaluation, it truly is. And, as financial guys, we're actually very simple people. We look for a few things. We just want our projects to perform on schedule, and we want our overall portfolio performance to enhance. And some of simple elements of that is we have work in process, the amount of cash and waste that we have tied on projects. We like to limit that. We like to reduce the overall risk on a project. Through this, we'd like to keep our project investments low. And then we have this happy result where our project performance increases and our portfolio return increases. So based on the fact that we were not having the results in the IT side that we've had in other elements of our business, we as financial professionals have, and organizations and executives have adopted through waterfall and other methodologies, kind of a traditional approach to project management. And after getting smacked in the teeth time and time again, I got to tell you, I actually very much became a disciplined, proponent of these traditional practices. And, every time somebody said that, hey, we're going to have this scope, I'd say, no, we're not going to have that scope. That's going to be a fixed scope. We're not going to change it. It's going to be in place. I want your requirements up front. You better be prepared because I don't want to hear 6 months down the road there's going to be a change. Similarly on schedule, the project's going to take a year. Well, after finding out, time and time again that 12-month project is actually 18 months or 24 months, okay, your head is on the line. This is going to be 12 months. We're going to live within these time frames. On a budget basis, the same thing. Budget creep on this. We fixed the scope. We're fixing the schedule. We're also fixing the budget. And you can tell the vendors that we're going to use here right now that they're going to be fixed price contracts. We're not going to allow any of this, down the road telling us that all of a sudden they've deployed more resources than we wanted them to. So I was feeling, you feel pretty comfortable that you're taking control as an executive, in particular on the financial side, to make sure these projects are going to be successful. And then finally, we're going to monitor them. We're going to look on a weekly basis, and we're going to make sure that we're burning this thing against our budget accordingly. And I'm going to look at my IT manager, and I'm going to say, you tell me, how are we doing? Are we on schedule? Is this thing green? Is it red? Is it yellow? Let's know so we can do something about it. So you feel as though you're doing what you can to control this. The only problem is, after doing this for years, the data, at least from my internal experience, you don't have to look very hard, kind of Google, IT performance, and you find things aren't doing well. As a matter of fact, some of the information we pulled out here, about a third of these projects, they fail prior to completion, which means that they don't even get off the ground. Half of the projects, based on one study, show that they overrun by double, which means our budgets double and the schedule doubles in half the projects. And then I love the last one. If we actually do what we've said we're going to do, if we incorporate, we're on schedule and we're on budget, 2/3 of the features that we build are rarely or never used. So what we're doing is we're actually packing in items that have no value. So this traditional approach, instead of kind of accomplishing the goals we want, really, as I've evaluated this, have done just the opposite. What we've done is we've locked in waste. We've increased our time to market, which has limited the time in which we get the cash out of this. We're decreasing the likelihood that we're going to meet our business needs. And then ultimately what we're doing is we're abdicating control instead of controlling the process. And through that abdication, what we're doing is we're minimizing our options. So all of the happy things we wanted to do on the front end, we're doing just the opposite of. And our project and portfolio return, instead of enhancing and hitting on expectation, we have these poor results. So why Agile? What I want to focus on today as we walk through here is the elements of project success. We're going to talk about the cash in the project and the waste. We're going to talk about driving the risk out of the project, and then portfolio return and how Agile can give us a better approach here. First of all, we're going to focus on squeezing the cash out of the work in process. Work in process is a term that comes out of manufacturing, and what it means, if you think of Detroit has a line of automobiles, and on that line you've got people that are working on the line, you've got half-finished cars, you've got stacks of inventory that are next to it. All of those elements require cash. We've got to put cash into building up that inventory, paying those people, buying that equipment. And we don't have finished cars on the line, which means that we actually have to tie up cash before we get to a market. Similarly, with IT projects, is we have a method with waterfall where we start out with analysis. We have to invest in that. We have a design phase, which, depending upon the organization, can actually be fairly comprehensive and long. There's engineering, there's testing, there may be back to engineering, and every step of the process here, what we're doing is we're increasing the amount of cash that we're investing in the project. So by the end of the project, what we've done is we've built up to what the budget was for the project, but we have at no point been able to get any cash back from the marketplace. What we've done is we've tied up that money. So with these larger projects, what we do is it ties up cash, and it does it in a couple of ways. One is when we go to seek the budget approval for those large projects, what we do is we approve the entire project. So the budget allocation means that we can't use that budget for something else. The other thing that we do is it's harder to get a return on those dollars on the front end. Remember when we were in the design phase and we were spending dollars? Well, guess what? It's going to be a while before we can actually get a return on that. And in particular today, a lot of sensitivity is as we tie up all this cash, it's going to hamper our overall organizational liquidity. So if you take maybe a typical IT project, I'd like you to look at the top graph here. Let's say that it's a 18-month project and we're expecting a 2-year payback, which, standard, it's within the realm of what's deemed as acceptable. Well, you could say, okay, great, after 18 months we're starting to get our positive cash flow, everything's fine and dandy. But the reality of it is what we're doing is we're accumulating a cash debt through the first 18 months. And we only, after 3.5 years under this scenario, get to the point where we've released all the money that we've invested in that. At any rate, what I was just jumping on was the second element of where we end up tying up cash is that these large projects, they create waste. They create waste from a couple of areas. One is when we have a project that's going to be delivered, say, 18 months out in the future, we need to guess what the market's going to look like 18 months out in the future. So we've got some assumptions, and we're going to have features that build based on assumptions as opposed to being closer to facts. The other is we have large cycle times in this. So we've got 18 months of bureaucracy to manage a big project, to spend. When we do the design phase, we've got our 3-ring binders. We might have volumes of requirements. And all of this, one, in the building. Number 2, in the monitoring and confirming that we're on schedule, ties up. Finally, there's buffering. And I'll get into that in just a second, what we mean. So on the wasted features, where people come in, and again, I'm pounding on the table, and I'm telling them, listen, what we're going to do is we're going to have a scope, and the scope's not going to change. So what we're doing is we're telling people, this is your one opportunity to come in and, give your requirements. And we want you to do that with having limited information about the market. So what are people going to do? What they're going to do is they're going to put every feature that they can think of on the table. And what they're going to do, because they don't know what the market is they're going to build contingencies in place. Geez, what about if the market turns sideways? What about if the customer acceptance is a little bit different? I better build a couple of different scenarios into these features to make sure that, that I'm covering all the bases. So it's no surprise that we look back and say that about 2/3 of the features that we're building in are built in for waste. When we look at the excess planning and processing, we've worked with organizations that have a whole team of people that are simply focused on shuffling the paper around and confirming that we're hitting schedule and doing other things. And just if you're building a cathedral versus building a country church, what you're going to find is there's a lot of bureaucracy and overhead in building these large structures, which you can avoid when you're actually looking at smaller projects. Finally, on the buffer side, this is kind of interesting. So what we do is we say there's going to be a fixed schedule, fixed project, fixed scope. Well, what happens when we talk to our IT department and we say, okay, this is going to be it. And if we're tired of getting burned and we want to make sure you're going to be on schedule. Well, the people that are seasoned in IT, they're smart. They're not going to say, hey, I think it's going to hit this number, so I'll give this number. They're going to build in some cushion. And what they're going to do, every level of the way, when you talk to the developers, you talk to the managers, you talk to the people that are running IT, everybody's putting in their cushion because they don't want to fail. They're putting in a cushion of time. They're putting in a cushion of budget. Similarly, we go out to our vendors, and we're going to give them fixed-priced contracts. Well, when we give them the fixed-price contracts, what do? They don't have all of the information in front of them. And if they're wise vendors, if they're smart vendors, what they're going to do is they're going to build in contingency, and because we're transferring the risk to them, they're going to transfer the reward to themselves. So my experience has been you've got 2 options when you have a budget. You can hit the budget or you can be over the budget. I rarely run into a circumstance where you're under budget. So if people are building in the cushion, both from a time perspective and a cost perspective, they're going to use that up. Some examples of that, you got a developer who's under allocated with work. they may gold plate the code that they're working on. You have other developers that are, poorly assigned projects. You might have a death march at the end of the process because you haven't been able to line these things up that far out in the future. So when you actually look at the value that you're getting, even if the project is going according to schedule, there's a limited amount of spend, and sometimes it's going to be less than 50% that are actually spot on hitting the features that are going to be valuable and getting you return in the marketplace. So we go back to our process in waterfall. What do? How can we address this? Well, the Agile methodology or the Agile practices will have us focus, instead of on one big grand cathedral, is small value chunks. So what we do is we break this up into projects that have discrete value at the end of each one of these little projects. The other concept that we do is, instead of having this magnum opus where we want to go to market with everything, is what's the least amount of features that we want for either an internal release or a market release. So what that does is it allows us to reduce the amount of work in process. One is we have smaller chunks, but we're going to market sooner, so we're actually able to get a return. And over time, where we start to get a return, it starts to pay for the work that we're doing, and over time, as we have more features and we can accelerate that return, we get to the point where we've got our cash back in the investment much sooner. So what this does in this process is it frees up cash, which is a good thing. We like that. We can invest that capital elsewhere, and it reduces waste, and what this does is it lowers the cost of the overall project. So we focused a little bit on squeezing cash. What I want to talk about now is driving risk out of the project. You never do it entirely, but I think we're going to show some process here that's going to help us quite a bit. We're going to focus today on a couple of different risks, and you could actually spend all day enumerating all the risks associated with projects, IT or otherwise. We've got it in two different categories. There is cost and schedule risk. So we have lack of information, meaning that we don't even know, even under the best of circumstances, what's going to happen with our platform when we integrate two pieces, what's going to happen down the road, and that lack of information leads to estimates that may have inaccuracies in them. We also have large schedules with phases, and we're anticipating 3 months of design, 6 months of development. And each one of these phases, they may not line up exactly right, or one may push to another, and within that schedule there could be risk as well. The other thing is we can have unplanned changes. I know a lot of companies that we've talked to have their budgets evaporate in the middle of a budget year. So what happens when you are in the middle of producing a big project or a couple of big projects, both of which you think are going to be great value, but you no longer have the spend to address both? So what about if the project's going off target? What about if we're not hitting the project? What are our options? And a lot of times with these cost and schedule risk, we end up being in a position where we're going to have to look at a total write-off. The other risk we're going to focus on is benefit realization risk. What we mean here is originally the project was put together for some reason. It might be an internal cost savings. There might be a market opportunity that we're going for. Well, what about if the market changes? What about if the needs change? What about if there's a change in the overall economy? What about if now the features we think are valuable, we thought were valuable, are no longer valuable, or vice versa? What's going on with our competition? So there's a lot that can happen in our hypothetical 18-month project that can change and would change the way that we would approach the project. So going back to the traditional approach, where I'm pounding on the table telling them fix schedule, what I've done is I've said I want those upfront comprehensive requirements, put everything on the table. And I'm baking in a very high cost of change because I've got hardwired design and I've got a lot vested in that. 3 or 6 months into the project, if there's a change that hits us, what's our flexibility now in changing the project that we've launched? It's very, very difficult. It's hard to change the middle of the wall of one of those cathedrals when all the concrete's being poured into it. So what that does is it limits the flexibility. High cost change means that these are rigid, they're set in stone, they're moving forward, or basically set in stone. The other thing we talked about is fixed schedule. So this requires hard dates for the phases, so we get everybody lined up, we make sure that everybody's going to perform in an orchestra fashion. And what we've done is we're buffering for the unknowns. And because we put buffer in every one of the elements, we've extended that schedule as much as possible. So what we're doing is we're removing ourselves, we're not bringing ourselves closer to the market, and we don't have information that's better. What we're doing is we're pushing ourselves farther away from the market when we're making these decisions by virtue of the process that we have in place. We've got a fixed budget, which means that we need to, in a large project, have high capital allocations, so I can't use that for other items. My budget allocation is up front, which means I can't have the flexibility without just killing the project mid-term. And what I've done is I'm locking in waste with that fixed budget. When I try to transfer that risk to my IT people or to my vendors, they're going to put in contingencies. And finally, on the monitoring side, what we're monitoring is how much are we burning? How many hours against what we were budgeting are we burning? What are the budget dollars that we're burning? What we're not doing is we're not really focusing on the value, meaning where are we in the value process? How much value are we getting out? So this traditional approach, it leads to big and long projects. These projects, because they're further away from the market by nature, are going to be less accurate. We've got less flexibility because of the quote-unquote controls we're putting in place. And we've got a lot of waste that's built into it based on the contingencies that people are going to embed. So what we've done is we've increased our probability of failure. What's more troubling from my perspective is there's a real loss of management control in this process. So what happened to the monitoring? The information, look, we've got a lot of people. We've got a lot of good people that we work with. As a matter of fact, one of the good things I can say is most people are strong performers and good people, that I've run into. And a lot of these strong performers and good people, when they run into a problem, they're going to solve it themselves. They've had track record in the past, and they're going to continue to do it. So you get a little bit of a hero mentality. So when you start to run into an issue, a technical issue in a project, is that necessarily going to be revealed to management? Not necessarily. And I think what a lot of people have a tendency to do is they say, I can make that up. I can solve that problem. In particular, early in a budget, I believe in this budget, I believe in this project, I know it's going to be successful. If I reveal this right now, all they're going to do is kill the budget. I don't want to do that. So a lot of times we'll have a tendency to see that these projects can drift for a while with the problem not being known. And again, we're measuring progress, not value, so we can have the comfort to know that we've burned up 85% of the budget at 85% of the time, but I can tell you more times than I care to remember where that 85% budget that was green within a week turns into a 40% complete red budget where we're looking at double the budget. So the difficulty is that the measurements we're using are not really effective measurements to monitor where we are. And then as we talked about, if we do run into one of these problems, we really don't have a lot of flexibility midterm to do anything about it. So when something goes wrong, more times than not, people are sitting in front of me when I'm in my CFO capacity or chief restructuring capacity, and they're saying, okay, here are our choices. We need to spend twice what we thought we were going to spend. What's my other choice? I can flush the investment down the toilet. So I don't like those options. I don't like a gun to my head, but those are the options that basically were in front of us. But what do you do about it? Well, instead of having these grand projects over a period of time, what about if you had every 2 to 4 weeks within that type of time frame, we had a very meaningful evaluation. And we had a value chunk, so actually have something deliverable. What I mean by that is at the end of, say, a 3-week period, you're able to sit down with the development group and you're able to actually examine the working product. And I'm not talking about a technical person in there with a clipboard, checking off and saying that the lines of code were completed. I'm talking about somebody with a low IQ like a CFO, like myself, can sit in there and actually see what took place and say, this is what they planned on doing 3 weeks ago. This is what was delivered 3 weeks ago. They're on track. This is working. Or the other side of it is they didn't hit it. Why didn't they hit it? What are the problems? And they're revealed. So when I have this kind of visibility, what I have is I have the ability every 3 weeks in this example to make a clean break. I can say, you know what, you guys aren't really delivering as you had expected. What are the problems? We talk about it. If it doesn't look like there's a satisfactory solution, you've got the ability to kind of end things. Similarly, you can look every 3 weeks and see if things are on target and make the changes accordingly. So what this does is it allows us to make the right decisions. The other exciting part about this is every 3 weeks, we also get to take a look at the market and our customer feedback. Maybe when we put our big, long list of all the things we wanted to get done in place, the features that we thought were going to be extremely important because of a market shift have changed. Because of some discussion with our customers, or say a competitor comes out and launches a competitive product, all of a sudden we say, wow, let's reshuffle these things. Well, would it be great, instead of being locked into that and be looking 2-3 years in the future to the next release, to be able to every 3 weeks just reshuffle and say, these features that we thought were important really don't have value anymore, let's eliminate them. Similarly, looking and saying, hey, these features that we thought were of less value, or new features, go ahead and incorporate those in. And when do you start doing them? You start doing them immediately. So what this really allows us to do is it allows us to fail fast and stop the project, so we're limiting our investment, and then succeed early, so we're able to double down. We can actually accelerate, reallocate resources from losers into winners to accelerate on those that are good, and accelerate time to market or expand features. So what we're doing is we're able to invest and move our money around. So what this does, instead of having this spend more or kill the project as options, we've given ourselves a full preview of options that we can work on. We can maintain the scope. We can expand or accelerate if things are going well. We can reduce scope, keep the project going, but now eliminate it because maybe it's not, some of the things aren't going to have as much market value. We can keep the scope as is and just reprioritize. Okay, we want to put this on the front end instead of the back end and put it to the top. And then finally, if things aren't going well, we can still shut that project down. So if we look at, we've got our broken into our feature chunks where we've got value at the end. Well, now what we've done at the end of each one of these feature chunks is we've got transparency. We can see, are we on schedule? Are we delivering according to what we wanted to? We can incorporate market and customer feedback into that process. And now not only management control, but we can influence this process as executives. So the outcomes of this, we've got rapid course correction. We're no longer, kind of at the helm of an aircraft carrier. We're really kind of on a speedboat here, and we can kind of turn in, right or left as much as we want. We can go ahead and not invest in failures. We can go ahead and find those winners and bring money to them. And we've got real management control because we've created options. And we've got influence, the most important thing, influence in terms of redirecting the projects going forward. So if you look at, great, you bring some cash out of the process, we're giving ourselves some options, reducing some of the risk here. What can it do for not only project performance, but portfolio return? Well, going back, we've accomplished some of the goals that we wanted to, the fundamental goals. We've found a way to reduce the waste in the process. We found a way to reduce the amount of cash invested. That risk is going down. The fact that we've got smaller projects, we're quicker to market, our actual overall project investment has reduced to reduce waste. So our project performance goes up. Well, lo and behold, if all your project performance goes up, your portfolio performance will go up and your portfolio return will increase. Well, beyond that, there's some value here from a portfolio perspective. If you look at the characteristics of these waterfall and traditional projects, we've got larger projects, we've got longer projects, and they're done in serial, meaning that we start with the design and we end, with the launch. So we beginning, middle, end, and no release in between. On the larger projects, we've got fewer projects. We have a finite budget. Let's say you got a $20 million budget and you've got $4 or $5 million projects. That's what you're locked into. The problem with that is that you have less diversification. You can measure that against, say, 10 $2 million projects. So the larger projects means that it crowds out our ability to invest into a lot of projects. The longer projects, what these do is they're going to span budget cycles. And what I mean by that is
In our 18-month example, let's say that that starts in the fourth quarter of one fiscal year. What it's going to do during the project length is it's going to be in that fourth quarter, it's going to span through yet another full budget cycle, and then it's going to be released in a third budget cycle. So because we're spanning that, it reduces our portfolio options. And what I mean in that example, in the second fiscal year, the only thing we do as portfolio managers is we bring barrels full of cash to that project, continue to feed it. The only time that we really have any influence is if something goes wrong. If we find out mid-project that there's an issue with the project, and then we have that option of either spending more money or killing the project. On the serial approach, it means that the value is only at the end of the project. We have already talked about the project being longer. So we have few real options or ability to change once we've started that and recognize value or incorporate any of the change that we've seen in the marketplace. So the graph that we have up here right now is kind of a hypothetical. We've got 4 projects, and if you look at the budget cycle, you've got Project A and Project E that start outside of the budget cycle that we're demonstrating. And you've got Project B and Project D that are within that budget cycle. So when you think about what your control is the ability on the front end of Project B and Project D to control what the budget is for those projects. But once they're in place, you really don't have much ability to do anything other than monitor whether a disaster is taking place. So under this example, you have really one project, Project E, that's going to be realized within that calendar year, and you really didn't have any influence within that budget cycle on that project. It's simply released then. So you have fewer investments, we're limited control within the period, and we can't offset the costs with the returns. And we really can't measure the portfolio return. And at any day, we can't stop and look and say, how are we doing against these projects? All we can say is, are they burning against budget? So how would we change this? First thing we do is we're going to break these long projects up into these value chunks. And when we break them into value chunks, what we're doing is we're getting the visibility. So we get the control, we get the influence, we can actually look and see how these things are doing and are we getting value at the end of each one of these phases. The next thing we do is we're going to limit the amount of features to get it to market or get it to internal release as quickly as possible. By limiting these features, what we've done is the amount of budget commitment that we need to have in place to get it to market has reduced overall, and by doing that, we can actually increase the number of projects that we have within the budget cycle. And we now have the ability of bringing these things to market sooner. We can start, we can stop, we can have a value chunk go 1 or 2 iterations, stop that as in Project C. We can wait until the budget clears up again and go ahead and start the process again. The other thing that we can do is we can stop a project. Project B, is we're now going to shorten, we're going to bring it to market with much less of a feature set and realize value. What are we going to do with the funds? Well, let's go ahead and push those funds over into a new project that we hadn't anticipated, or there was a market opportunity that newly presented itself. Similarly, if we have a Project D that is finished or is complete, what we can do is we can reallocate that and accelerate another project. And what you see is all of this is taking place within the same budget cycle, and it's being done on a dynamic basis. So instead of on a big bang approach looking at your budget cycle and kind of releasing the funds and going forward, you have the ability to take within that budget, whatever it is, nimbly push cash back and forth and move it from the losers to the winners. So how we've done this is we broke it into the feature chunks so we can actually see how we're doing and monitor the progress. We've taken these projects much quicker to market or to internal release. We've reallocated the investment to those that are going to give us a fatter return, and we can now increase a project, we can delay a project, we can stop a project. So what this does is it maximizes our portfolio return, and it does it because we've increased the diversification. We have the ability to monitor and manage the performance within the budget cycle. We have the ability to redirect funds from the winners to the losers, and we can optimize now within the budget cycle. So Here's my analogy. You go to the track. You bet on your horse. You are halfway through the race. Your horse stumbles. It falls down. Wouldn't it be a wonderful world if you could say, hey, you know what? I'm going to reclaim half of my bet, and I'm going to say, oh, you know what? Horse number 7 is in the lead. I'm going to put my money on horse number 7. And that's exactly what we're doing, is giving ourselves true portfolio flexibility, similar to if you have your own personal stocks and bonds. What you can do on a day-to-day basis is take that market information and use it to take your money and put it in the place that's going to give you the highest return. So one of the things is, if you kind of focus on this, is if you think of, we're going to sail from the San Francisco Bay to Hawaii, what you wouldn't do is you wouldn't, even if you could bring in the best navigation experts and the best captains, you wouldn't spend 2 months figuring out, okay, what are the settings, what's the compass setting, how are we going to put our rudder, what are the tacks, and launch to sail. Similar to that you might do with a large IT project where you design everything up front and then just let it launch and hopefully it shows up. What you do is you take off and you check your wind, you check your currents, and you check your compass continuously. And by doing that, you adjust the course and adjust the direction you're going to go. What you've done is you've dramatically increased your ability of actually getting to the place that you wanted to go. Whereas no matter how much definition and no matter how much rigor we want to do while sitting, in the Bay of San Francisco, that's not necessarily going to get us, because we simply don't have the information we need to get us where we want to go. So what does this do? We're reevaluating our priorities on a consistent basis. We're reshuffling the portfolio on a continuous basis. We're starting and stopping projects in a very dynamic fashion. And we're recognizing these incremental value throughout the process. Okay, I'm going to excuse me. Sorry about that. So the outcomes of this, increased portfolio diversification. That helps us reduce risk. We're continually redirecting, and we reclaim control of the portfolio management. So we talked about is squeezing the cash and waste out, reducing the risk, and being able to now effectively manage our portfolio. Let's take a look at that versus our traditional. We've got big and long projects. Agile, we've got smaller and shorter projects. In traditional, they're less accurate because, by definition, they're further from market. In Agile, they're more predictable because they're closer to market. We've got less flexibility under the traditional method because we have built that rigor in the process. In Agile, we're iterating every 2 to 4 weeks, and we're giving ourselves the flexibility to modify and change. So what this does is the traditional method actually increases the risk of failure, and what we're doing with this new practice is we are increasing the probability of success. So we have less management control versus active management control and influence, and finally all that waste, the 2/3 of those features that we're not using, we can eliminate not only that waste but also the overhead waste associated with managing these big projects. So just in summary, the benefits of this process is we're freeing up capital, we're reducing unnecessary cost, we're recognizing a return earlier, getting some payback, and we're really zeroing in on the current market needs, customer needs, and internal needs. And bottom line, from a CFO's perspective, I'm increasing my project and portfolio returns. How are we doing this? We're doing it by very easy, or they're simple concept, necessarily easy to implement. But the simple concepts, we're breaking these big projects into small chunks. We're evaluating projects more frequently. We're injecting market and customer feedback to make sure we're going to be more spot on. And we're actively reprioritizing the project portfolio and making sure that we are getting the maximum return. And we're reallocating those funds to the higher performers. So this isn't a new and unproven practices here with Agile. As a matter of fact, they've been around since the mid-1990s. There are practices in terms Scrum and Extreme Programming or XP Programming, some of the buzzwords around it. But it's no longer really a grassroots movement. This is something where we've got wider adoption now among Fortune 1000 companies. We've got a couple of statistics here. 75 to 80% of IT organizations are using some form of Agile, and I think our experience shows that a lot of that comes up through the developer ranks as opposed to being pushed down from the top. And 15 to 25% have a repeatable Agile process that's in place. So we work with a number of our clients, large clients. There's some IT. You take a look at Google, Microsoft, others that are out there. You also have companies like Chevron and some of the larger utility and other Fortune 1000s that are adopting this as well. So why now? Everyone can kind of take a look with what's going on with the economy. I've got a big laundry list of things that I need to do within my organization. It's not time for me to take on changing anything. I'd argue just the opposite. What you can do here is you can reduce the risk inherent in these large IT projects. If you think about betting the farm, as a lot of organizations do, on some of these large projects, why take that approach? Why not break that down and break that risk down? You can improve your organizational liquidity. If you don't have those large commitments, you can go ahead and free up those funds for other things. And we've got capital budgets which aren't growing right now. They're reducing. So how do you get more out of those capital budgets, both through the portfolio management as well as just expanding the number of projects that you can take on? What you do is you maintain a flexibility to take advantage of opportunities. And I see it, more times than not, today in particular, where companies will say, we'd love to do that, but we just don't have the money this year. We've allocated everything this year. And why would you tie your hands and not give yourself that flexibility? So what this really does, it's an opportunity to do a game-changing impact for your organization. And there are a few things right now as we look at what our control is that we can do that will actually provide that for us. So we are going to do some questions and answers. Right now I'm going to hand this back over to Eric as I take a look at some of the questions that have come through.
John, thank you. That was excellent. And as you finished up there, very timely. What I wanted to do just now is while we're taking a look at the questions and getting ready to answer those questions for you, I thought I'd just take a minute, talk a little bit about Solutions IQ for those that maybe aren't familiar with Solutions IQ. We are a company of 250 people that provides a full spectrum of professional services. Our clients include Fortune 500 companies like AT&T and Chevron, as well as smaller growth companies like Classmates.com and InfoSpace. We partner with Version 1 to equip companies with the tools and the knowledge to make them succeed with Agile. We work with companies at every stage of adoption, offering everything from introductory and certification training to full enterprise-level management consulting services. Unlike a lot of boutique firms in this space, we develop software ourselves, and that's really the difference at Solutions IQ is at the heart of it, we are software developers here. We work with clients to develop and augment their teams with software development teams to provide Java and .NET expertise in producing products within their environment. And we got started over 30 years ago in the technology staffing, and that continues to be a big core element to our business. We provide temporary and permanent positions folks for both Microsoft and companies like Microsoft and T-Mobile. Many of you listening today are just getting started understanding Agile practices and experimenting at the grassroots levels, but some of you have really worked at implementing Agile at the team level and are considering how to adopt this enterprise-wide. We provide a complete set of services at each of those stages, at each of those levels, helping organizations to not only learn Agile, but implement it at the team level and then ultimately at the enterprise level. To help Agile teams be the most successful, we offer on-site training and coaching. For larger project work, our Agile development teams can plug right into your Agile process. In fact, working with our seasoned Agile development teams, a lot of our clients find is a great way to mentor their own development organization as they can see firsthand and work with our team to understand how to implement these practices effectively. And then finally, for those organizations who've proven the benefits of Agile and are ready for large-scale rollout, we provide a complete management consulting service. We call this program Enterprise Agile Adoption. We've invested some time building around a core of key services in the area of organizational change management, management consulting, process coaching, as well as hands-on technical development coaching. For more on Enterprise Agile Adoption Program, I invite you to check out our website. There's lots of information there about how the program works and how you can follow up and check with folks on how to get that implemented in your organization. So we're going to turn it back over here. We've got a few questions. We've got a lot of questions, actually. So we've got a lot of questions. We're going to be going through as many as we can as time allows. I'll apologize in advance if we haven't had a chance to answer your question. We'll follow up to all those questions via email if we don't answer them live online. So are you ready, John?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. First question we have here is, question says, we have to cut our project budgets in half. How does this help? So this is very timely, I guess. A lot of organizations trying to cut their budgets. How is this going to help?
Yeah, well, I think actually it helps tremendously, and we've seen it with some of both our smaller and larger clients where they're in a situation right now where they just don't have the spend that they had originally anticipated. As we talked about, if you are, say, in an environment where your budget has been cut in half, the ability to now take on these projects and put them into smaller chunks means that the commitment doesn't need to be as high. So organizationally, what we can do is we can lower the amount of spend that we need to bring this to a success, and therefore we can actually start a number of their projects that otherwise we might have to abandon.
Here's another good question. We hear this frequently with our corporate IT clients. It says here, you talk a lot about shipping software. Projects at my company are related to reducing costs.
Yeah, that's good. And actually, I do want to apologize a little bit to you folks. We have a tendency, or when we put this together, it was focused a little bit maybe from a product company's perspective, simply because it helps, I think, emphasize some of the points that we have here. But in reality, it's just the same with internal projects, and in particular, if you're looking at cost savings, what you can say, instead of time to market, it's time to cost savings. So what you want to do is you'd want to reduce your features so that you can start getting those cost savings much, much sooner. And then you can continue to add features on so that you can enhance and increase the amount of cost savings. But I think you take a look at the same. In one case, you're enhancing revenue. In the other case, you're dropping costs. Both provide a return to your organization.
Next question here says, how is this different from phase development that we've been doing for years?
Well, I actually think it's quite a bit different than phase development. In the phase development, again, what we're doing is we're taking a serial approach, and we are kind of hard baking in the project early on. And by definition, we really don't have nearly the flexibility, and again, we're making these much bigger projects. So phases break the project into parts that are phases. What we're talking about is really quite a bit different. We're talking about breaking these into independent value pieces, so that there is something at the end of each phase that the company can, or that your organization can get some value from.
Good. Next question here. Will this approach help me for projects that are already started? We've worked with a number of organizations who have been adopting Agile, and a lot of times for organizations, they like to do it in bite-sized pieces. They might even start with just one development team within a project. And that way it actually gives them the ability to see how they perform against some of the other development teams. But it depends upon the organization. We had one customer, I recall, who had said, had some apprehension about starting mid-project, but then when it was done said, this actually worked out a lot better, because to try to line up our organization and make a wholesale change for methodology and just all of a sudden have the entire organization change overnight would not have been realistic. It might have resulted in failure. The fact that we could kind of start mid-project and then start just changing the practices midstream allowed people to digest it and really transition the project into something that worked out very well for them. So I like this question. I think it's going to kind of get to the heart of what I do next. So someone writes in and says, so what am I supposed to tell my CFO? I only need 40% of my budget. What if I really need the other 60%?
Well, I would put it this way. If you're going to your CFO with a big budget, what are the chances that it's going to get approved, and particularly improved in today's environment? And depending upon the organization, sometimes there's executive approval, sometimes you're talking about committee approval, sometimes you're talking about board approval. The larger the project, the further up the food chain it needs to go. If the approach can be, how can I show value to my executives as soon as possible, and I know when I show them value, it's going to be easier for me to sell the next phase, that actually might be an easier internal sale. So if you could take that 40% and turn it into something that's going to be valuable, it's going to be a lot easier for your organization, in particular today, to be able to okay the rest of the budget going forward.
Good. Here's a great question. Are any big companies doing this?
Yeah, I mentioned briefly that and I know some of these questions come throughout the presentation. But yeah, and again, you can kind of do a little, if you're interested, you can do a little bit of Google search, but we're seeing is more and more acceptance among very large companies and among very large companies that aren't technology companies necessarily. We're seeing it actually in the financial sector as well, which is kind of interesting because what are they driven by? They're driven by cost reduction. And I think one of the bad raps that Agile gets is because a lot of the organizational acceptance is pushed from the developers up, the value is never really seen. And that was the same with Solutions IQ. I mean, we were tried and true and religious about it, but for me in my role, we had never really articulated the business value or what the benefit was from that perspective. As you look at it, the business value is so overwhelming, at some point there will be a paradigm shift where management starts to mandate it because that's the only way they're going to get the 30 or 40% improvement in efficiency in IT or product development.
Time for one more question. Okay. Will this approach work for big projects?
Yeah. It kind of depends upon how you define big projects. But I think one of the things is big projects lead to big failures. So what you'd really want to do is you'd want to, even if, because sometimes you can't bring something to market or you can't do an internal release 4 weeks after or even 8 weeks after. But what you can do is you can, by focusing on the value at the end of each phase, make sure that you're making progress. And I can't emphasize this enough. And I do sit in. I'll sit in on what we call sprint. Sprint is the value chunk. I'll sit in on the sprint demo. And even if I haven't been involved with the project, it becomes very transparent as to what was trying to be accomplished and how it was accomplished. And the final thing I'll say is you don't even have to wait for the sprint demo. You can walk through a developer area. We've got something called a burn down chart. I every day know whether they're hitting what they want to hit, and depending upon the team, if they let you, you can stand in and they'll talk about whether they're having success and they're actually on track or not. So it's actually day to day.
Okay, unfortunately that's all the time we have now. We are going to, as I said, we'll follow up those that we didn't have a chance to answer with an email response to your questions. Thank you so much for the great questions. For those of you that are left wanting some more, we're going to actually follow this up with a series of webinars that extend on this topic. On April 29th, we'll be back working with version 1 to deliver some content around building your business case for Agile. And this time we'll get into a little bit more nuts and bolts around the methods for calculating the value of implementing Agile within your own organization. And then on May 13th, we're going to talk about tracking Agile progress. Is it working? We've got some metrics here that we'll share about how to measure the value of the implementation of Agile itself and whether or not it's moving as quickly as you'd like to see it. And then at a future date, there'll be more information to follow. We're going to follow this up with a couple more related to this topic. Agile portfolio metrics, a dashboard for executives. We'll get into what are the metrics that an executive, financial executive will want to see. And finally, strategies for maximizing your Agile portfolio value. Thank you all for attending. We want to I'll let you know that, following this presentation, you'll receive an email with links to the recording and copies of today's slides. For more information on Solutions IQ, there's a wealth of information on our website, as well as you can contact us by email at info@solutionsiq.com and 1-800-235-4091 to talk to us directly. Thank you very much again, John, for giving us a wealth of information from the financial perspective, and thanks all for attending. Have a great day.